Here he is, friends. He got his suit back just in time. And no matter what happens in his life, he gets absolutely no respect.
Johnny Carson wasn't just a talk show host. He was the king of late night. When The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson first aired in October 1962, it didn't take long for America to fall in love with Carson. Night after night, millions tuned in to watch him joke, tease, and sometimes even challenge his guests in ways that made late-night television magic. But after 3 unforgettable decades on air, Carson decided it was time to step away. In 1992, when the curtain finally fell on his last episode, fans expected to see him everywhere. Interviews, tributes, maybe even a surprise guest appearance or two. Instead, he vanished. No media tours, no talk show cameos, just silence. So what really happened? Why did the man who could make an entire nation laugh, sometimes even cry or fume, choose to disappear so completely? And what was life like for Johnny Carson once the applause faded? Stick around, because we're diving into the real story behind Johnny Carson's quiet exit and the mysterious final years of television's most iconic host. The untold story of Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson wasn't born a legend, but he sure became one. Long before the cameras, the laughter, and the fame, Carson was just a curious kid from Corning, Iowa, who loved making people smile. Born on October 23, 1925, to Ruth and Homer Carson, Johnny grew up in a small town that had no clue it was raising the future king of late night. He was the middle child, sandwiched between an older sister and a younger brother, Richard, who would later go on to direct television himself. Life moved around for the Carsons, from Avoca to Clarinda, then Red Oak, until they finally settled in Norfolk, Nebraska, when Johnny was 8. That's where the magic began, literally. One afternoon, he stumbled upon a book on magic at a friend's house, and just like that, a lifelong obsession was born. He ordered a magician's kit by mail, practiced non-stop, and became the family's go-to entertainer. He would follow his parents and siblings around the house, grinning and saying, "Pick a card, any card," over and over until someone gave in. By 12, he was hooked. His mother even sewed him a cape, and at 14, he made his debut as the Great Carsoni, performing for the local Kiwanis Club. The pay? $3 a show. But for Johnny, it wasn't about the money. It was about that electric moment when the crowd laughed, clapped, or gasped. Even then, he was chasing the same high that would later make him a TV icon. After high school, that restless spark pushed him west. He hitchhiked to Hollywood, dreaming of stardom and chasing a feeling more than a plan. But that trip didn't exactly end in a red carpet moment. In a story that's become almost mythical, Johnny was fined $50 for impersonating a midshipman. Whether it really happened or not, it fit the pattern. Even before the fame, Carson had a knack for turning mischief into a story worth telling. Then came the war. In June 1943, Carson joined the U.S. Navy and entered officer training through the V-12 program at Columbia University and Millsaps College. By the time he was commissioned as an ensign, the war was nearing its end. He was stationed aboard the USS Pennsylvania in the Pacific, working as a communications officer, decoding encrypted messages. Between duty shifts, he picked up boxing, and surprisingly, he was good. 15 wins, no losses, and 1 draw, all aboard the same ship. But the defining moment of his Navy years wasn't a fight. It was a trick, a magic trick to be exact. During a conversation with U.S. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal, Carson mentioned he didn't plan to stay in the Navy after the war. When Forrestal asked what he wanted to do instead, Johnny said he wanted to be a magician. Forrestal challenged him to prove it. And Johnny did, right there, pulling off a card trick that left one of the most powerful men in America genuinely amused. For Carson, that was it. That was the moment he realized he could charm anyone, even someone serious enough to run the Navy. When the war ended, Johnny didn't waste time. Using the Navy's education benefits, he enrolled at the University of Nebraska. There, he joined the Phi Gamma Delta fraternity and kept up his magic gigs, this time getting paid $25 per show, a major upgrade from the days of the Great Carsoni. At first, he majored in journalism, thinking he would write comedy instead of performing it. But the stage was calling, and within months, he switched his focus to speech and drama. That decision changed everything. For his senior thesis, Carson recorded something no one had done before, a project titled How to Write Comedy for Radio. It wasn't a dry essay full of theory, it was a performance. Johnny mixed skits and jokes from popular radio shows with his own explanations of why they worked, breaking down timing, rhythm, and delivery like a true student of laughter. The thesis was so unique that it let him graduate in just 3 years, a clear sign that even as a student, he wasn't following the usual path. By 1949, Johnny Carson had a degree in radio and speech, a minor in physics, and a growing hunger for the spotlight. He had served his country, tested his craft, and figured out what made people laugh. The foundation was set. He just didn't know yet that it would lead him to 30 years of television history. How Johnny Carson became the king of late night. Johnny Carson didn't just walk into television, he climbed his way up joke by joke until America couldn't get enough of him. But long before he became the face of The Tonight Show, he was just a young man in Nebraska trying to make a name for himself in a new world called broadcasting. His journey started in 1950 at WOW Radio and Television in Omaha, where he hosted a quirky morning show called The Squirrel's Nest. It was classic early Carson, smart, unpredictable, and a little mischievous. One of his funniest bits involved interviewing pigeons on the courthouse roof, where they would report all the political corruption they had seen. That kind of humor, cheeky, clever, and just close enough to the edge, would later become his trademark. When the cameras stopped rolling, Carson would host local events and church dinners to make ends meet, sometimes standing face-to-face with the very politicians he had just roasted on air. That mix of courage and charm caught the attention of the right people. One of those local figures' wives had family ties to the radio business in Los Angeles and helped Carson land a connection. Before long, he was off to California, ready for something bigger. By 1951, Carson had joined KNXT in Los Angeles, hosting his own sketch comedy show called Carson's Cellar. It was low budget, offbeat, and totally his style, and it quickly caught the eye of comic legend Red Skelton. Skelton was so impressed by Carson that he brought him on as a writer for The Red Skelton Show. Then, one fateful night, Skelton accidentally knocked himself out during rehearsal, and Carson had to fill in. He nailed it. The audience loved him. That single night showed Hollywood that Johnny Carson wasn't just a writer. He was a star waiting to happen. Big names started noticing. Comedy icon Jack Benny invited Carson to appear on his show in 1955. Carson playfully mimicked Benny's style, the slow timing and the facial expressions. And Benny, instead of being offended, told him he would go far. He was right. Over the next few years, Carson hosted a handful of shows, including game shows, talk shows, and variety programs. Not all of them worked out, but he was building something much more important: experience. Then in 1957, he landed a new gig with ABC called Who Do You Trust? It was a daytime game show that finally gave him the freedom to be himself. He could improvise, joke, and chat with contestants, and that spontaneous humor lit up the screen. For the first time, America saw the real Johnny Carson. The show was a hit. And it wasn't just Carson who found success. He also met his future right-hand man, Ed McMahon. The two clicked instantly, forming the kind of comedic chemistry that would define The Tonight Show years later. By the early 1960s, NBC was looking for someone to take over The Tonight Show, a late-night experiment that had started with Steve Allen and then Jack Paar. It was a big job, 105 minutes of live television every single night, and Carson wasn't sure he was up for it. When NBC first offered, he turned it down. But after a lot of convincing, and with his contract at ABC winding down, he finally agreed. On October 1, 1962, The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson premiered. The first year was rocky. Carson struggled to find his rhythm and the pressure was immense. But once he settled in, there was no stopping him. America fell in love all over again, not with a character or a gimmick, but with Johnny himself. His charm and effortless way of handling both guests and awkward moments made him must-watch television. And of course, There was that voice that kicked off every show. Ed McMahon's booming, unforgettable, "Here's Johnny." Then came the monologue. The golf swing, the sketches, the interviews, and the laughter that rolled through living rooms across the country. The show became part of people's nightly routine, a comforting and hilarious end to the day. Behind the scenes, The Tonight Show was constantly evolving. By 1972, the production had moved from New York to Burbank, California, closer to Hollywood, and the celebrity guests who filled Carson's couch. As his success grew, Johnny adjusted his workload, hosting fewer nights a week, but keeping the magic alive. Guest hosts like Joan Rivers and later Jay Leno filled in when he took time off, but no one could truly replace him. By the mid-1970s, Carson was the highest-paid man on television, earning millions each year, not just for hosting, but for the brand he had built. Hollywood came calling, offering him movie roles, including The Thomas Crown Affair, and even a part in Blazing Saddles. He turned them all down. Carson knew his place was behind that desk, not in front of a movie camera. For 30 years, Johnny Carson made America laugh, think, and sometimes even tear up. He didn't just host a show, he shaped an era. From his early pigeon interviews in Omaha to his legendary nights in Burbank, Carson built a legacy few have ever matched. He wasn't just the host of The Tonight Show, he was late-night television. The four women Johnny Carson loved and lost. Carson could make an entire nation laugh every night, but when it came to love, his story wasn't nearly as smooth. The man who seemed to have it all, fame, fortune, and charm, struggled to make marriage work. 4 times he tried. 4 times it ended in heartbreak. Johnny's first love story began in 1949, when he married Joan Jody Morrill Wolcott. They met back in college at the University of Nebraska, where Jody was a member of the Phi Beta Phi sorority, and Johnny was just starting to find his footing in radio. That same year, Carson landed his first broadcasting job, and soon after, the couple welcomed 3 boys, Christopher, Richard, and Corey. The early years were full of promise. They moved around the country as Johnny chased bigger opportunities, from writing for comedian Red Skelton in Los Angeles to hosting quiz shows in New York. But success came at a cost. Jody once confessed that Johnny's career always came first, saying he was too busy for us. By 1959, their marriage was on the rocks. They officially divorced in 1962, the same year Johnny took over The Tonight Show. What followed was one of the most painful chapters in Carson's life, the loss of his son, Rick. Like his father, Rick was drawn to the entertainment world, working behind the scenes on TV shows like Tomorrow. But he struggled privately, battling alcoholism and mental health issues. In 1991, tragedy struck. Rick's car plunged off an embankment near California's Highway 1 while he was reportedly trying to take photographs. He was just 39. Johnny took 4 weeks off from The Tonight Show. When he returned, he showed photos of Rick and those taken by his son, telling viewers that Rick had a laugh that was as contagious as could be. For a man who spent decades making others smile, it was one of the few times the world saw his heart break. Carson's second marriage began not long after his first ended. In 1963, he married Joanne Copeland, a Pan Am stewardess with a career of her own. They had first met in the early 1960s, and by the time Johnny was stepping into his legendary role on The Tonight Show, Joanne was right by his side. She believed in him, encouraged him to take the job, and even admitted that she fell in love watching his early tapes. But fame has a way of testing love. Joanne later revealed that Johnny expected her to act as a go-between for him and his staff, and the pressure wore her down. She also spoke openly about his struggles with alcohol, which often darkened his otherwise magnetic personality. By 1972, their marriage was over. Even so, there was no bitterness in how Joanne remembered him. She once described Johnny as a little boy from the Midwest with impeccable manners. After his death in 2005, she confessed, "The pain of this is to the bone." Before her own passing in 2015, Joanne helped preserve his legacy, releasing early tapes of his Tonight Show beginnings, a glimpse of the man she once loved when he was still finding his rhythm. That same year, 1972, Johnny married again, this time to model Joanna Holland. They met at New York's famous 21 Club, and Johnny later joked that he was flirting like a sophomore the first time he saw her. Joanna was striking, successful, and used to the New York scene. But when The Tonight Show relocated to California, everything changed. She didn't want to leave her city life behind. But Johnny made it clear that if they were to be together, California was non-negotiable. In Burbank, they built a beautiful home and entertained Hollywood friends. But behind the scenes, things weren't easy. Joanna wasn't as involved in Johnny's work as his previous wife had been, and like before, alcohol and temper issues took their toll. In a 60 Minutes interview, Carson admitted that when he drank, he wasn't the fun type, saying that instead of becoming loving and gregarious, he would turn cold and angry. Their marriage unraveled, and by 1985, they divorced. Years later, Joanna was remembered fondly by those who knew her best. She passed away in 2025, having lived a quiet life after her years in the limelight. Then came Johnny's final act in love, and perhaps his happiest. In 1987, he married Alexis Moss, a woman far from the Hollywood scene. They met in Malibu, near the ocean he loved so much. Unlike his previous marriages, this one was private and peaceful. Their wedding was small, just his brother, the judge, and a phone line connecting Alexis's parents from the East Coast. No cameras, no crowds, just the Pacific breeze and a man who, after decades of fame, was finally content to keep something for himself. Judge William Hogaboom, who officiated their wedding, once said that Johnny didn't muff his lines that day, a small but fitting detail for a man whose life had been lived in perfect timing. He and Alexis spent their years traveling, enjoying quiet moments and finding joy in the smallest things. When Johnny Carson passed away in 2005 at 79, Alexis was right there with him. For a man who spent most of his life making the world laugh, his final years were calm, private, and filled with love, the kind that didn't need an audience. Johnny Carson may have been married 4 times, but through every heartbreak, fame, and failure, he remained exactly who he had always been, a man chasing magic both on stage and off, the dark side of Johnny Carson. Feuds, scandals, and the jokes that went too far. Johnny Carson might have been America's late-night favorite, but behind that charming grin and razor-sharp wit was a man who didn't always play nice. His jokes could make you laugh till you cried or leave you wishing you'd never crossed him. For 3 decades, he ruled The Tonight Show. But that power came with a few clashes, controversies, and feuds that reminded everyone Johnny could dish it out, but not everyone could take it. In 1980, Carson found himself in the middle of a headline-making feud with none other than Wayne Newton. It all started when Johnny backed out of a deal to buy the Aladdin Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, and Newton swooped in and bought it instead. The press made it sound like Carson had lost, and that didn't sit well with him. So he did what he did best. He turned it into comedy gold. Night after night, Carson cracked jokes about Newton on air. But Newton wasn't laughing. Years later, on Larry King Live, he called Carson a mean-spirited human being and claimed Johnny had gone out of his way to humiliate people. Things got so tense that Newton eventually stormed into Carson's office at NBC and threatened to beat him up if he didn't stop. Needless to say, the jokes ended. But that wasn't the only time Carson's humor caused real trouble. In February 1982, he was arrested for drunk driving near Beverly Hills. He pled no contest, got probation, and had to attend alcohol education classes. For 90 days, the man who once joked his way out of any situation could only legally drive to work or to his classes. Johnny's jokes also rubbed other stars the wrong way. Perry Mason actor Raymond Burr was furious over Carson's repeated fat jokes. Burr only appeared on The Tonight Show twice after that, once in 1968 and again in 1976. It was a quiet protest that said more than words ever could. And then there was the New York Times. In 1969, the paper published an article claiming Carson was the highest-paid man on TV, earning $75,000 a week, an enormous amount back then. Carson fired back live on air, calling the story damned unfair. He didn't reveal his real salary, but made it clear he wasn't happy. The paper later issued a correction, admitting its reporter was probably wrong. But the damage was done. Johnny Carson didn't like being misunderstood, and he wasn't afraid to let the world know. His intolerance for disloyalty was another defining trait. When Joan Rivers, one of his favorite guest hosts, got her own late-night show on Fox directly competing with The Tonight Show, Johnny cut her off completely. No calls, no congratulations, nothing. Even years later, Rivers admitted he never spoke to her again, despite her many attempts to make peace. Sometimes, though, Carson's jokes didn't just offend individuals, they caused national chaos. In December 1973, he casually joked during his monologue about an alleged toilet paper shortage in America. The next day, store shelves were wiped clean, literally. Panic buying swept the country, creating an actual shortage that lasted for weeks. Toilet paper had to be rationed, all because of one Johnny Carson punchline. He later apologized, calling the media reaction unfair. But the damage had already become legendary, proof that his words carried real power. Carson was also protective when others tried to use his brand for laughs. When a portable toilet company tried to name its product, "Here's Johnny," he sued and won. That catchphrase was sacred territory. Even his parodies weren't always well received. His spoof of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood once rubbed Fred Rogers the wrong way. Rogers said he appreciated humor, but he worried that Carson's jokes made him look wimpy to viewers. After realizing how much it bothered Rogers, Carson reached out privately and apologized. A rare, soft moment from the man who usually let sarcasm do the talking. Johnny Carson was complicated. A man whose wit could fill a room but whose temper could clear one just as fast. For decades, he made America laugh. But behind the laughter were rivalries, regrets, and reminders that even kings of comedy have their dark sides. The tragic reason Johnny Carson spent his final years in isolation. For 30 unforgettable years, America ended its day with Johnny Carson. From 1962 to 1992, The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, wasn't just late-night entertainment, it was a ritual. Johnny had this rare gift of making anyone sitting across from him interesting. He could make you laugh, think, and sometimes even cry, all within a single hour. But when the curtain finally came down, the man who had spent decades connecting with millions chose to disconnect completely. What made the king of late night walk away from everything and everyone? Behind the charm and the effortless laughter, Johnny Carson was always a deeply private man. He wasn't the type to chase the Hollywood spotlight off camera. In fact, he often avoided it. While he knew plenty of stars, he preferred quieter company, magicians, musicians, and a small circle of friends who shared his love for craft and curiosity. Away from the cameras, his favorite moments were simple ones: reading, playing tennis, or drifting on his yacht in Malibu. To most people, Johnny was a superstar. To himself, he was just a man who liked peace and silence. That desire for solitude started early. Born in Iowa in 1925 and raised in Nebraska, Johnny grew up the middle child in a family that seemed picture-perfect from the outside. His father was kind, steady, and supportive, someone Johnny admired deeply. But his relationship with his mother was complicated. She was distant, strict, and hard to please. That emotional chill followed him for life. Even after her death, he discovered she had secretly kept a scrapbook filled with clippings about his success, proof she was proud but never said it. That kind of upbringing left its mark, teaching him to hold his emotions close and trust very few people. That same guarded nature seeped into his personal life. Johnny married 4 times, and each ended in divorce. His dedication to his career often came before his family, and though he adored his 3 sons, he struggled to show it. When his middle son Rick died tragically in 1991 after a car accident, it shattered him. He took weeks off The Tonight Show and later admitted that the loss made him reflect on all the moments he had missed. It was a turning point, one that quietly broke something inside him. By the time Johnny retired from The Tonight Show in 1992, he wasn't just stepping away from television, he was retreating from the world. He stopped giving interviews, turned down public appearances, and rarely allowed himself to be photographed. In his Malibu home overlooking the Pacific Ocean, he lived out his final years almost entirely alone. Apart from his wife, Alexis Moss, and a handful of close friends, Johnny saw fewer than 20 people a year. His days were quiet, filled with reading, music, and long walks by the sea. After decades of laughter and applause, silence became his refuge. But that isolation wasn't just about peace, it was also about regret. Johnny had spent his life making others feel seen, yet he struggled to let anyone truly see him. He carried deep remorse over his failed marriages and distant relationship with his children. Though he had given up hard liquor in his later years and tried to be more stable, the emotional damage had already been done. He knew his temper, his drinking, and his fame had cost him more than he ever admitted publicly. Still, Johnny never stopped doing good, he just did it quietly. He donated millions to causes close to his heart, scholarships, performing arts centers, and medical research. He helped fund hospitals, built theaters, and supported his old schools, all without seeking recognition. To the world, he had vanished. But behind the scenes, he was still giving back in ways few ever knew. Even documentary filmmaker Peter Jones, who spent 15 years trying to convince Johnny to open up, couldn't get him to talk. Every year he would write Carson a letter asking to make a documentary about his life. For years there was silence, until 2003, when Johnny finally called him personally. His answer was simple. He had nothing more to say. To Johnny, his work spoke for him. Everything he wanted the world to know was already there, in the laughter, the interviews, and the moments he shared with America from behind that desk. And maybe that was the point. Johnny Carson had spent his entire career performing for millions. In the end, he wanted something that fame could never give him: privacy. Away from the noise, the pressure, and the endless eyes watching him, he finally found what he had been missing all along: peace. Johnny Carson passed away from complications of emphysema in 2005 at the age of 79. In his final years, he lived quietly by the ocean, reading, reflecting, and embracing the solitude he had always seemed to crave. For a man who gave the world laughter, his final act wasn't about applause. It was about finally letting the lights go dim. Johnny Carson didn't just disappear. He chose to end his story his own way. Quietly, privately, and on his terms. Do you think Carson's isolation was a sign of peace or regret? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.